9. Unauthorized climbing. Known to his many followers as Remy Enigma, a French photographer named Remy Lucidi rose to fame on social media for scaling tall buildings and other high fixtures around the world. For anyone with a fear of heights, his content was nothing short of downright terrifying. But he received a lot of admiration and respect for his work, including the jaw-dropping photos he captured thanks to his willingness to climb dangerously high structures. During a recent trip to Hong Kong in July 2023, Remy tragically fell from the top of the 68-story Tregunta Tower and plummeted to his death. While there are many questions surrounding his death, it's believed that Remy got trapped outside a top-floor penthouse and either slipped, losing his footing, or got too tired to keep hanging on while he waited for help. Remy wasn't even supposed to be at the building in the first place. He was given access to the property by telling a doorman he was there to visit someone living on the 40th floor. The person he claimed he was there to see has since clarified that they didn't know the daredevil at all. Surveillance video showed Remy getting off an elevator on the 49th floor and going to the top of the 721-foot building. To get outside, he forced open a door, and when he somehow got trapped, he knocked on the window of a penthouse where a maid was cleaning inside. The housekeeper immediately called the police, but Remy had already fallen by the time officers got to the scene. Lucidi's death is tragic, but he also knowingly risked his life countless times. No matter how skilled someone is at climbing, it only takes a split second for someone to fall. 8. Fake butt injections. 46-year-old Maria Olivia Castillo passed away in 2005 thanks to a fat blockage caused by what she thought were French polymer injections. Their purpose was to reduce wrinkles in her butt. She received the treatment in California from a woman named Martha Mata Vasquez, a 39-year-old former beautician who offered to do the procedure for people who were considering going to Mexico where it was much cheaper. What they didn't know is that Vasquez was actually injecting them with Mazola corn oil and that she wasn't licensed to perform cosmetic injections at all. On top of Castillo's death, similar injections put another patient into a coma and caused medical issues for others, according to prosecutors. They accused the woman of continuing to perform the procedure even after learning that some of her clients had gotten sick, charging $1,400 a piece for each injection. Decided to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter and received a 15-year prison sentence. At her sentencing, she apologized to her family, her victims, and their families. Her lawyer, Tom Worthington, made claims that Castillo was unaware the injections were dangerous. He said that, if anything, she was simply guilty of negligent conduct, not intent to kill, and that the sentence was way too harsh. The case sheds light on the ongoing issue of illegal cosmetic injections and surgeries done in the US. Tempted by lower prices offered by the unlicensed practitioners, many take their risks either knowingly or without looking into the provider's credentials. But as the saying goes, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. 7. Killer karma. On a Saturday night in August 2022, a young man brutally stabbed a 37-year-old woman and her teen daughter right outside their house in Fukuoka, Japan. The victims were arriving home at about 10 o'clock p.m. when they saw the man leaving through the front door. He immediately charged at the mother and daughter, stabbing them both in the stomach before dropping the knife and fleeing the scene on foot. A nearby witness called for help and emergency responders discovered the victims covered in blood and clinging to life. The women were immediately rushed to the hospital where their conditions luckily stabilized. About a half hour after the attack and less than 2,000 feet from where the stabbing took place, the suspect was fatally hit by a train. DNA testing confirmed the man's identity and his ID was located inside the victim's home, where he broke into earlier that night. The suspect was a student from Tokyo that met the daughter through a social app. When the young woman stopped talking to the stranger online, he tracked her down through a GPS feature on the app. The attack came during a noticeable spike in criminals targeting victims they met online, according to police data. Public officials have since stepped up their efforts to educate the public on this new type of stranger danger that's often at the center of violent attacks and similar crimes like stalking and harassment. While it's not entirely clear how or why the man got hit by a train, many people saw the outcome of the situation as karmic justice, while some may have even considered it well-deserved. 6. Playing with electricity. Infamously dubbed the Aachen Strangler, a German serial killer named Egidius Schiffer was sentenced to life in prison in 2008 for killing 5 hitchhikers between the years 1983 to 1990. He was discovered dead in his cell in 2018 with a live electrical cord wrapped around his intimates. An autopsy concluded that the 62-year-old died from heart failure resulting from the electric current. Schiffer had removed the cord from a lamp in his cell, stuck the end of it into a nearby wall socket, and used it as a strange source of pleasure. The shocks were too strong though, and his body couldn't actually handle the amount of live electricity flowing through it. It's fair to wonder if Schiffer's mental health had reached a low point. After all, he was not only sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars, he'd already spent almost the entire 8 years leading up to his death in solitary confinement, all alone. Investigators considered every possible angle and ultimately concluded that Schiffer's death was an accident. 5. Rock climbing without gear. Free climbing is exactly what it sounds like. It's rock climbing without the use of ropes, harnesses, or other safety equipment that most people would use to avoid falling to their death. One of the most prolific free climbers in the world was the late Austin Howell, who shocked even the most experienced climbers in his field with the risks he was willing to take. On the one hand, there's no denying Howell was one of the most accomplished and skilled climbers in the world, scaling peaks and cliffs that many would be lucky to climb with gear. But just one slight misstep or loss of control and it could be lights out for him. And sadly, that's what happened to Howell in 2019 when he plummeted 80 feet to his death from Shortoff Mountain in Burke County, North Carolina. County officials described the area of the mountain Howell fell from as one of the most difficult portions of the peak. The climber fell into a region that was hard to get to, and by the time emergency responders located him, he was already dead. Howell experienced a close call 11 years prior in 2008 when he started to struggle on an indoor rock wall. His belayer accidentally let go of the brake rope and Howell came crashing 35 feet to the ground. After that, he broke 3 vertebrae and several bones, and it took months for him to finally recover. All things considered though, Howell was well aware of the risks involved with free climbing, and he took them all knowingly. While some believe that climbers get overconfident about their ability to avoid disaster, the plain and simple truth is that these athletes are just passionate about their sport. And if they want to do something that seems crazy, there's likely no talking them out of it. 4. Subway surfing. Subway surfing, standing on top of moving subway cars, has strangely become popular among teens over recent years, and the problem's only getting worse thanks to social media. Simply put, it's an extremely dangerous activity. A lot of young people have died doing it, and these tragedies fail to serve as warnings because teens often feel invincible or fail to consider the potential consequences of their choices. In one of the most recent subway surfing accidents in the United States, a young man named Jay Thiran Rayapurapam passed away in an incident along Washington, D.C.'s metro rail system. His body was located alongside the tracks at the Rhode Island Avenue station. Just a few moments before his death, Jay was filming himself happily as he rode on top of the train. A closer look at his online and phone activity revealed that he expressed huge adoration for other young subway surfers, to the point of idolizing these youths. In one exchange, Jay praised a popular subway surfer from New York City in a text message, saying that he knew the activity was dangerous, but it was the only time he felt alive. Ironically, achieving that feeling was the reason the young man lost his life. His parents later revealed that their son's behavior had become more risky and troubled leading up to his death. Therapy was ineffective, and like many other teens, Jay placed a high level of importance on achieving internet fame. Jay's dad, Washington Post editor Desikan Thayurnapam, called for more to be done to stop teens from dying in these subway surfing accidents. The young man's mother, Vaishali Honawa, expressed similar sentiments. She said there are limits on what parents can do to stop these tragedies, and that social media platforms have a responsibility to take down subway surfing videos. Honawa also begged transit companies to step up and help do their part to stop the problem. Unfortunately, even when subway surfing videos are taken down from social media, the dangerous hobby only seems to be getting more popular. It would be great if telling young people about the dangers were enough to stop them, but there are clearly no easy answers to getting the point across effectively. 3. Being clumsy. During a tour in Sydney during 2014, a world-renowned American hypnotist named Dr. Scott Lewis somehow fell off the balcony of the 11th-story apartment he was staying in to his death. The 50-year-old crash-landed on the 4th-floor balcony of another apartment unit, bringing his life and career to an unexpected end. A sold-out performance at the Sydney Opera House had to be cancelled, and police immediately got to work investigating the mysterious tragedy. It was clear that Lewis died from falling 6 stories, and authorities didn't suspect foul play, but nobody understood how or why it happened in the first place. One theory suggested Lewis was climbing between balconies, lost his footing, and accidentally fell. If this was the case, it would certainly qualify as a reckless and arguably stupid way to die. The late hypnotist friend, Mark Kornhauser, told the Sydney Morning Herald that he thinks Lewis just fell over the balcony railing. He described his friend of 20 years as clumsy, with a habit of stumbling into things, but also as a timid and very cautious person. In other words, Lewis wouldn't have climbed between balconies voluntarily, and he definitely wouldn't have jumped on purpose. Unfortunately, the circumstances around Lewis's last moments will probably always be shrouded in mystery, but a tragic loss of balance is the most likely explanation. 2. Hiking drunk. In July 2023, 41-year-old Gerardo Hernandez Rodriguez and his wife spent a Saturday afternoon at Oregon's Multnomah Falls with their 5 kids. While hiking on an embankment running along the Columbia River Highway, Gerardo slipped and fell 200 feet down to his death. Unable to see where he landed, the family instantly called 911. Emergency responders found Gerardo about 45 minutes later, but it was already too late to save him. According to authorities, alcohol impairment was a factor in Gerardo's death. While there's a good chance he may have fallen even if he was sober, it's probably not the smartest idea to hike along a potentially dangerous trail while under the influence. The tragedy happened just days before the 4th of July, and the park was busy as vacationers came to celebrate the holiday. Other park goers were shaken by Gerardo's death, and some were even afraid to hike along the trail he'd fallen from. Less than a year before, a 62-year-old woman fell in the same spot while hiking with friends and died due to a brain injury. If nothing else, these tragedies should serve as a cautionary tale about how at the end of the day, humans' fates are left to nature's mercy. 1. Death by selfie. When the selfie era began, it quickly became clear that taking a photo of yourself can be a lot riskier than it seems. Hundreds of people, maybe more, have died taking selfies, and the number just keeps growing. Sometimes, a simple moment of distraction is to blame, while other tragedies sprout from people doing dangerous things to get the perfect shot. A young Russian woman named Xenia Inyatyeva put herself in harm's way back in 2014 when she climbed a 30-foot bridge in the city of St. Petersburg for a photo opportunity. The amateur photographer scaled the structure during the night while a friend waited on the ground below. At some point, Xenia started to lose her balance. She tried to maintain her grip, but accidentally grabbed a high-voltage cable and electrocuted herself in the process. Xenia fell and landed on the rough concrete below. Her friend rushed over, but was paralyzed by shock and didn't know how to react to the situation. Emergency responders arrived and found the young woman sitting next to Xenia, who died from her injuries. The tragedy raised questions about young people's affinity for exploring and taking pictures of train tracks. Psychologist Martin Voigt told the Mirror that railway tracks have an aspect of danger to them, and that this is perhaps what attracts people to them. But as this and other tragedies reveal, sometimes it's best to admire something from a distance.
Nine, Kilauea Volcano. In early 2022, an elderly man from Hilo, Hawaii fell to his death after losing his footing on a platform above the Kilauea volcano. Hawaii Volcano's National Park Rangers and country firefighters searched in the pitch dark for the man after his family members reported him missing. The victim was a 75-year-old male, but his name was never released to the public. He apparently fell 100 feet, 30 meters, after going over the side of a viewing platform that was situated above the Kilauea volcano, which is located on Hawaii's Big Island. The man's body was eventually found below the viewing area's crater rim, and a helicopter was called in order to help retrieve his body. Afterward, an investigation into the matter was launched by the National Park Service, NPS. In a statement, the NPS explained that the volcano had erupted in September 2021, and ever since then, local residents and tourists have been visiting the park at night, so they can try to catch a glimpse of a glowing lava lake. The eruption supposedly caused significant hazards, including rockfalls, high volcanic gas levels that create airborne health risks, and volcanic glass fragments. Unfortunately, not much else is known about this tragic incident, but hopefully the family of the victim found peace in knowing that he's now at rest. 8. Too much water. In January 2008, an inquest heard how a 35-year-old man from Milton Keynes, England, died after consuming too much water. After downing a massive amount of water, Sean McNamara was found on the floor of his bathroom. Initially, it was believed that he'd suffered a heart attack. However, a post-mortem autopsy revealed that he'd swallowed so much fluid in a short amount of time that his brain swelled up as a result. This ultimately led to Sean's untimely demise, and his cause of death was determined to be water intoxication, a fairly unusual cause which has a very low number of recorded cases and is often linked to marathon runners who drink too much water after a race. The same incident apparently happened in April 2007 when a 22-year-old fitness instructor named David Rogers, who was also from Milton Keynes, passed away from water intoxication after completing his very first London Marathon. During the inquest for Sean McNamara, Dr. Ian Reed, the man who carried out the post-mortem autopsy, said that in his 35 years of being a pathologist, he'd never come across such a case. He explained that excessive consumption of water might be associated with a person suffering from psychological issues. Sean's devastated mother, Gillian, described to the inquest how her son had a lengthy history of anxiety and depression, and that he'd been admitted to the hospital after having an overdose in 2005, something that she considered a cry for help. However, the officers that discovered Sean's body at his house in York found no clear signs of self-harm or any indication that the man wanted to end his own life. While recording Sean's verdict of accidental death, Coroner Donald Coverdale said that the case was rather unusual and that the man's consumption of excessive amounts of water may have gone unnoticed by those around him. He also stated that if Sean had instead consumed a large amount of alcohol, his strange behavior may have been perceived. But because it was water, nobody knew what signs to look out for. 7. Hunting trip. In January 2023, a man from Wichita, Kansas was tragically killed during a hunting trip after his dog accidentally shot him. 30-year-old Joseph Austin Smith was reportedly sitting in the passenger seat of a truck when he was fatally shot in the back. According to a statement that was released by the Sumner County Sheriff's Office, the back seat contained a rifle and hunting gear. And apparently, a dog belonging to the owner of the truck accidentally stepped on the rifle, causing the weapon to fire. The bullet that was discharged from the gun unfortunately struck Joseph, who passed away at the scene from his injuries. Based on reports from the local sheriff's office, Joseph was killed instantly. And while foul play may have been considered a possibility in the case at first, it's since been ruled out. In the end, the man's death was labeled an accidental shooting, and the investigation into the incident has been closed. And while this may be the first time you're hearing of an instance where a dog was responsible for shooting someone, it's happened before. One example of this occurred back in 2018, when a pit bull Labrador named Baloo accidentally shot a gun that struck his owner in the leg. They'd been playing outside their home in Iowa when the firearm discharged. Another similar case occurred in 2015 when a pooch ironically named Trigger shot his owner in the foot after she'd left a shotgun on the ground without putting the safety on. Joseph was a plumber employed by Brown's Plumbing Services. And after finding out about the tragic incident, his boss, Chris Brown, no, not the rapper, created a GoFundMe page in order to help the man's family with memorial and funeral costs. The fundraising page has already met its goal of $20,000, even surpassing it by $2,740. And while the money can't bring Joseph back, it likely helped put his family at ease since they didn't have to pay out of pocket for the man's sudden and tragic accidental death. 6. MRI, oh my. In Sao Paulo, Brazil, a lawyer was tragically killed when his firearm was discharged at a hospital by an MRI machine's magnetic field on January 16, 2023. According to Jam Press, the gun-loving victim, who's been identified as Leandro Matthias de Novas, was taking his mom to get scanned at the Laboratorio Cura. It wasn't known by the hospital staff that the man was carrying a registered gun on his person, as Leandro believed the rules didn't apply to him because he wasn't the one getting the MRI. When staff asked the pair to remove all the metal objects they had on them, Leandro ignored their warnings and continued to hide the gun on his person. Removing all metal from an MRI room is protocol at hospitals because the machines create an extremely powerful magnetic field. But Leandro didn't seem to be aware of the dangers the machine posed. And he didn't think too much about it because he wasn't the one getting the scan. This decision, of course, had fatal consequences. When the MRI machine was powered up, it pulled the weapon from the man's waistband, causing the firearm to go off. The bullets that were fired struck the lawyer in the stomach and inflicted serious damage. He was rushed to the São Luís Morumbi Hospital to be treated for his injuries, where he barely held on for weeks, but eventually succumbed to his wounds on February 6, 2023. After the incident, a statement was released by the facility's PR team, claiming that both Leandro and his mother signed a form regarding the MRI protocols, but that the gun enthusiast failed to mention his weapon and entered the unit with it on his own accord. Before his passing, Leandro posted pro-gun content frequently to TikTok, where he'd amassed over 8,000 followers. 5. Crushed by Denny's sign. In early 2023, a married couple was killed in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, after a sign from a Denny's restaurant fell onto their car during a wind advisory. 72-year-old Lillian Curtis and her husband, 77-year-old Lloyd Eugene Curtis Sr., passed away from blunt force injuries that they sustained when the heavy sign fell onto their vehicle, according to spokesperson Dan Alpiger from the coroner's office in Jefferson County. The sign apparently crushed the couple's car after it fell from a pole near the establishment's parking lot, located about 45 miles, 72.4 kilometers south of Louisville. Mary Graham, Lillian and Lloyd's daughter, was driving at the time of the incident and was also injured. Luckily, though, she was released from the hospital after getting treated for chest wounds. Amy Nichols, the pair's granddaughter, told local news outlets that Lillian suffered a catastrophic head wound, and that Lloyd sustained similar injuries. As reported by the National Weather Service in Louisville, a wind advisory had been in effect on the day of the accident, with peak wind gusts reaching 45 to 55 miles per hour, 72.4 to 88.5 kilometers per hour. The couple, who'd been together for more than 50 years, had been on their way to Colombia with their daughter when the sign fell onto their vehicle. Lloyd underwent major heart surgery just a few days prior, and the family had just picked him up from the hospital. Amy Nichols told the Courier-Journal that her grandparents were basically the glue that held her family together, and that their passing was absolutely devastating. She described Lloyd and Lillian as the most loving, compassionate, understanding, wholehearted people in the world. and she said she felt blessed to have been the couple's granddaughter. 4. McDonald's accident. A 42-year-old father of 2 was killed in a freak accident at the drive-thru window of a McDonald's restaurant in Vancouver, Canada in late 2021. When Tony Ailes arrived at the fast food joint at around 5:30 a.m., he planned to grab his meal quickly and then head to work. However, he dropped his bank card as he attempted to pay for his food, which forced him to get out of the vehicle to retrieve it. When he did this, though, he forgot to put his car in park, ultimately resulting in him getting pinned against the side of the building. According to News 1130 Radio, as Tony was picking up his bank card, his vehicle rolled forward directly into him, crushing him to death against the McDonald's restaurant. Unfortunately, Tony died just a few weeks before his 9th wedding anniversary, leaving behind his beloved son and daughter, aged 8 and 6. His wife was extremely distraught by his passing, and so too was the man's brother-in-law, Neil Pender, who told the station that Tony was the perfect dad and the perfect husband. After the tragic incident, 2 fundraisers were created in order to help the man's family in the wake of his death. In just a short amount of time, they raised over $100,000 from roughly 800 donors. Although what happened seemed to be a horrific accident, an investigation into the matter was launched by the British Columbia's coroner's office. However, there haven't been any updates on the case since 2021. 3. Kiowa Island Gator. 58-year-old Cynthia Covert died on Kiowa Island in South Carolina in May 2020 after attempting to get close and personal with an alligator. The woman was visiting a pond with one of her friends when the pair noticed the gator in the water. She apparently wanted to get a better look at the animal, even though her pal advised her not to. In the end, though, she did what she wanted, and she paid the ultimate price for her decision. The alligator was put down by a deputy in order to try and get Cynthia away from the creature. According to the official police report, the woman's friend yelled for her not to get any closer to the gator, but she continued to advance toward it. When she was about 4 feet, 1.2 meters from the animal, it lunged at her and grabbed her in its jaws. Based on witness testimonies, Cynthia didn't make a sound as the alligator pulled her into the water. The woman's husband and another man attempted to beat the animal with shovels, but the gator just swam deeper into the pond. When deputies arrived at the scene, the creature kept surfacing with Cynthia and going under. Luckily, as it was doing this, an officer managed to shoot it as it surfaced again. The woman was pulled out of the water by firefighters who used poles to lift her. And while she initially survived the attack, she later passed away from her injuries at the hospital. Her official cause of death was drowning. 2. Hot dog eating contest. A college lacrosse player choked and died during a hot dog eating contest for charity in Somerville, Massachusetts in October 2021. Madeline Nickpon, a 20-year-old attending Tufts University in Boston, participated in the contest with several other college students at an off-campus residence. Based on reports from the Rockland Westchester Journal-News, as she was eating the hot dogs, she started to choke and eventually fell unconscious. The outlet reported that she later died at Massachusetts General Hospital. Madeline was originally from Suffern, New York, and she loved to play lacrosse. She was also studying biopsychology at the time of her death. Thousands of faculty, students, and staff gathered together for the young woman's vigil that was hosted by the university's lacrosse team. Madeline's teammates were completely heartbroken to hear of her passing, and in an Instagram post, they said they will miss her every day. In order to help cover the costs of Madeline's medical and funeral costs, a GoFundMe page earned more than $162,000 for her family. 1. After-hours water slide. In the summer of 2020, a man from Arizona decided to sneak into a water park after closing, which he thought would be a fun adventure. But after he got stuck on a water slide, things took a devastating turn for the worse. 31-year-old Ryan Kelly snuck into a closed aquatic center in Scottsdale, purportedly to beat the summer heat. He was believed to be a transient and likely had nothing to lose by breaking into the water park. But when an officer patrolled the area surrounding the aquatic and fitness center, he believed he heard muffled cries for help and started to investigate. Ryan was later discovered trapped inside one of the park's water slides, which amplified his cries, making it easier to hear him. Emergency responders were immediately called to the scene to try and free the man. They conversed with Ryan for about an hour, but eventually he stopped answering them. This was when things turned from a rescue to a recovery mission. Officer Kevin Watts reported to azfamily.com that Ryan had crawled inside a water slide pipe that was part of the superstructure. And in order to free him, the whole thing had to be dismantled. It isn't clear from the police report how exactly the man got stuck, but he unfortunately paid the price for his actions with his life.
Eight, electrified urine. This gentleman's decision to urinate on an electric pole was captured on camera for the world to see. The video circulated on social media in late 2020, but it's unclear where the incident happened or if the man died. Another man was filmed knocking himself out cold when he relieved himself on a security fence at a Quebec airport in 1997. There's been some debate over whether or not a person can accidentally kill themselves by peeing on electrified structures. According to experts, it's rare for an electrical current strong enough to kill someone to travel up a stream of urine. But relieving oneself on a downed power line is another story apparently. In 2010, a 50-year-old Washington man was found dead along a roadside in Grays Harbor County. Evidence of the scene showed that he crashed his car into a power line, but that the accident itself wasn't deadly. The man's fate came with his decision to urinate on a power line that was knocked down in the crash. And even if it doesn't kill you, the experience of urinating on electrified objects is painful, as the people we mentioned previously quickly did. So it's something you want to avoid doing, even though you'd likely live through it. 7. Jet skiing over Niagara Falls. Daredevil Robert Overacker spent 7 years planning the biggest stunt of his career, going over Niagara Falls on a jet ski to raise awareness to the plight of the homeless. During that time, his friends tried to talk him out of following through with his plan on at least 2 occasions. But he remained undeterred, and in 1995, he decided it was time to finally carry out the stunt. Overacker was about 300 feet from the edge of the falls when police constable Richard Daniels begged him to turn back. Daniels later told the Buffalo News that Overacker yelled, "I don't think so," as he throttled forward with a sign that said "Feed the homeless" attached to his jet ski. Chilling footage of the moment Overacker went over the falls showed the daredevil separating from his jet ski and plunging straight downward while the jet ski continued propelling forward. A loud bang could be heard from Overacker's rocket-propelled parachute, but it did no good because it wasn't strapped to his body. Also, there was the fact that it had already become separated from it. He plunged 180 feet to the water and rocks below, bringing his life to an end at just 39 years old. According to the Niagara Falls infotourism website, someone else had packed Overacker's parachute, and he was unaware of the fatal error. But many, if not most people, would likely agree that going over the falls is a bad idea, period. Out of the thousands of people who've gone over the falls since 1901, both voluntarily and accidentally, only 16 have survived. And in the event that a daredevil lives through their descent, they can expect to see a fine of $10,000 Canadian or $25,000 in US currency, depending on which side of the falls they go over. 6. Fatal hiding spot. In 2005, a judge warned 57-year-old Earl Monroe Herring to stay away from his sister's house in Volusia County, Florida, following an alleged assault on his sibling. Herring had been accused of grabbing Mary Herring Donaldson by the throat during an argument about the sale of their late mother's home, where he had lived for nearly 20 years leading up to her death. He was angry because Mary and another sibling were trying to evict him. Mary was staying in the house to sort out their mother's estate when the fight with Earl happened, resulting in a no-contact order of protection. She had later told the Orlando Sentinel that the protective order was merely meant as a wake-up call to Earl that he needed to find another place to live. Several weeks later, he was seen lurking around the house when Mary wasn't home. Knowing Earl wasn't supposed to be there, witnesses called the police. During their first visit to the property, deputies didn't find him. Mary saw no sign of her brother when she searched the house, but she nevertheless called law enforcement back to the address so they could do their own, more thorough search. Deputies found Earl dead in the sweltering attic, where the temperatures had exceeded 100 degrees that day. There were electrical wires wrapped around the door's hinges from the inside, suggesting that Earl had seen the police outside earlier that day and had gone into the attic to hide from them. He passed away from heat exhaustion, which could have been prevented simply by leaving the attic. And if he hadn't violated the order of protection to begin with, giving himself a reason to hide from law enforcement, he may still be alive. 5. Electric subway rails. After leaving a New York City bar during the early morning hours in 2013, 30-year-old Matthew Zeno and his friend walked along a subway track in search of a place to relieve themselves. He then accidentally made contact with the electrified third rail, which sent 625 volts of electricity coursing through his body. His friend grabbed him in an attempt to pull him away and was also shocked. Zeno was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital, but the friend survived the injuries. A 27-year-old man named Zachary McKee met a similar fate in Chicago in 2012 when he climbed down into a set of train tracks to urinate and accidentally fell onto the electrified third rail. 4 years earlier, in 2008, a 41-year-old Polish man died from a 750-volt electrical shock he received while urinating on the train tracks of the London Underground. Workers found his body slumped over the track, and security footage showed the man walking off into a recess area but never re-emerging. The man's death caused public officials to fear that some tourists from other countries may not realize that some tracks in Britain are electrified, which is why, as a general rule, it's likely a good idea to avoid urinating on train tracks altogether. 4. Texting while driving a train. 46-year-old Metrolink engineer Robert Sanchez was at the controls of a commuter train in Chatsworth, California one day in 2008 when he blew through a red light and collided with a Union Pacific freight train. The accident resulted in the deaths of 25 people, himself included, and 140 others being injured. It was the deadliest train wreck in the United States in 15 years. According to investigators, Sanchez failed to call out the last 3 signals before the crash, as is required. At the very last signal, he was supposed to stop so the Union Pacific train could move onto a sidetrack and allow the commuter train to pass. But the freight train never got the chance because Sanchez failed to stop. He also didn't brake before slamming into the freight train at 42 miles per hour, indicating that he was extremely distracted at the time. To his neighbors and peers, Sanchez was a recluse, but he was somewhat of a legend among young train fanatics who he actively corresponded with on a regular basis. Investigators quickly discovered that he'd been exchanging text messages with a teenage rail enthusiast just seconds before the crash. Records showed that Sanchez was making plans to allow the teen to drive the train. This was definitely against the rules, but Sanchez had already shown a disregard for company policy before the deadly wreck. On at least 2 occasions, he was caught with his cell phone in the train cab, which was strictly prohibited. Investigators also found evidence of Sanchez allowing one of his young friends to drive the train at least once before. The saddest aspect of the tragedy is the fact that Sanchez's careless behavior killed and hurt so many people. It's ironic that someone with such a passion for trains would operate one so recklessly, especially given his many years of experience as an engineer. 3. Playing drinking games. In a dangerous challenge that took the internet by storm, young people chugged potentially lethal combinations of alcohol and other ingredients and then dared others to do the same. Known as neck-nomination, the trend began in New Zealand and soon spread to other countries, including Australia, Britain, Ireland, and Canada. As the trend spread, the challenges escalated to include more potent beverages. And at least 5 people died in Ireland and the United Kingdom while participating in the worldwide drinking game. 29-year-old Stephen Brooks collapsed at his apartment in Cardiff, Wales, while trying to chug a pint of vodka during a night drinking with friends and never regained consciousness. Investigators quickly discovered footage of him performing the challenge on social media. The young man's devastated friends and family took a vocal stand against the neck-nomination game after his death, warning young people that the game wasn't worth risking their lives over. Loved ones of 19-year-old Jonathan Byrne also spoke out against the game, challenging young people to not participate rather than go along with the craze. According to news sources, Byrne jumped into the River Barrow in Ireland as part of the challenge after downing a strong alcoholic beverage. His friends tried desperately to rescue him from the water, but unfortunately he drowned. 20-year-old hostel worker Isaac Richardson collapsed and died in London after drinking a lethal mixture of different alcoholic drinks in a bid to outdo other neck-nomination contestants. He'd mixed an entire bottle of white wine with a small bottle of vodka, a quarter bottle of whiskey, and a can of beer. Then, in Dublin, a 22-year-old DJ named Ross Cummings was pronounced dead at a hospital after downing a pint of whiskey. Investigators said that Cummings wasn't directly challenged to participate, but that people had been talking about neck-nomination at a party and that it seemed to inspire his deadly decision. The party's host, Alan Boland, later told the Irish Times that he'd tried talking Cummings out of drinking the whiskey. But he awoke the next day to find Cummings dead in his living room. Luckily, the neck-nomination trend didn't seem to last for very long. Unfortunately, though, it's since been replaced by other dangerous and life-risking social media challenges that have continued to claim lives. 2. Over the falls in a kayak. Even when every safety precaution possible is taken, daredevils often die in their attempts to go over Niagara Falls. So, it was arguably pure lunacy when a 28-year-old Tennessee man named Jesse Sharp thought he could survive going over the falls in a kayak with no life jacket, helmet, or any other protective gear in 1990. He spent years planning the stunt, which he planned to pull off by projecting himself far enough over the falls to avoid getting sucked into the churning waters or the deadly rapids below. Then, after landing, he would kayak another 4 miles downstream to a restaurant in Lewiston in time to make his 4 p.m. dinner reservation. Sharp saw wearing a life jacket as a potential hazard, which might prevent him from escaping if he got caught in the falls. He also didn't wear a helmet because he wanted his face to be recognizable to cameras. When authorities realized what was about to unfold, they diverted the flow of the Niagara River to lower the water level, hoping it would stop Sharp from following through with his plan. But instead, he paddled around the rocks and took the plunge. Sharp was never seen again after going over the edge, and his kayak was found downstream with a dent in it from hitting a rock. Years later, in 2011, kayaker Rafa Ortiz made plans to attempt the same stunt. He thought that with enough preparation, he could survive it. He and his crew of helpers spent months planning and made it all the way to Niagara Falls before Ortiz wisely backed out at the 11th hour. For his reasons for not doing so, he cited not only the obvious dangers of what he was planning to do, but the potential legal ramifications for him if he survived and his friends. 1. The dangers of bathing with your phone. A Texas teen named Madison Coe was visiting her father in Lovington, New Mexico in 2017 when she plugged her phone into an extension cord so she could use it in the bathtub while it was charging. She died from an electrical shock. leading to reports that she'd accidentally dropped the phone in the tub. A burn mark on Ko's hand suggested that the fatal shock occurred when she accidentally touched a frayed part of the extension cord. Ko's family hoped her untimely death would serve as a cautionary tale to others about the dangers of using a charging phone in the bathroom. A similar tragedy occurred in Italy in May of 2023 when a teenager named Maria Antoinetta Cutillo was electrocuted to death by her charging phone while bathing. She dropped the device into the tub at her home in Montefalcione, Avellino, while chatting with a friend. Theo's family wasn't home at the time, but the friend she'd been talking to grew concerned after the call cut out, so she phoned emergency services. And unfortunately, the young woman was dead by the time first responders arrived. Another teen was lucky to survive when she dropped her charging phone into the bath at her home in the Netherlands in 2019. Her mother rushed into the bathroom after hearing a loud scream and pulled her out of the tub. First responders revived her by punching her in the sternum and then rushed her to the hospital, where she spent 2 days being treated for her injuries. The young woman was incredibly fortunate that her mum sprang into action so quickly and for the timely response of paramedics. If much more time had passed, she likely would have died. She suffered from amnesia from the shock and didn't remember the moments leading up to when she dropped the phone.
Befriending an alligator. For most people who encounter an alligator in the wild, their first instinct is to run for their lives. But 58-year-old Cynthia Covert's reaction was the complete opposite when she visited her friend Barbara Howell on South Carolina's Kiowa Island in 2020. Cynthia was a nail technician who typically did Barbara's nails at the salon where she worked. But that day, they decided to meet privately. Barbara immediately noticed that Cynthia was high-strung and talkative, which was unlike her typical calm and professional demeanor. During the manicure, Cynthia noticed an alligator in Barbara's pond and became bizarrely fascinated with the creature. Ignoring her friend's pleas to stay away from the deadly reptile, she approached the gator and touched it. The panicked friend's husband rushed over to the pond to help, but by the time he got there, the alligator had her by the leg. A neighbor threw Cynthia a rope to grab onto and tried to pull her out of the water, but the alligator overpowered her in the waist-deep water and she disappeared beneath the surface. When she surfaced several minutes later, the reptile was still latched onto her leg. It's unclear what caused Cynthia to act so out of character that day. She had drunk a glass of wine, but Barbara wasn't sure if she had took any drugs. Sadly, her unusual behavior came at the expense of her life. 9. Trapped at the automatic car wash. 56-year-old Renee Tacte Jamie pulled into a 24-hour automatic car wash in Escondido, California, around midnight one night in 2022. For reasons that remain unclear to this day, he got out of his Scion, which continued to roll forward, and fatally pinned him in the washing area. An alarm sounded for almost 30 minutes before another customer arrived and dialed 911. Emergency responders found Jamie unresponsive between his vehicle and a piece of machinery. They performed CPR and rushed him to the hospital, but he died from his injuries. Police noticed that the car was still in drive, and they concluded that the car wash was probably not active at the time the fatal accident occurred. But the case is a mystery otherwise. At the time the story broke, the medical examiner had not yet revealed a cause of death, and the investigation was still underway. 8. Jet skiing over Niagara Falls. In 1995, professional stuntman Robert Overacker came up with a not-so-brilliant idea of riding a jet ski over Niagara Falls. If everything went according to plan, he would escape the jet ski with a parachute and safely descend to the bottom. But not everything went according to plan, as you've probably already figured out by now. As the 39-year-old prepared to take off from 300 feet, 91 meters upstream, Niagara Park's police constable, Richard Daniels, pleaded with him to change his mind and asked him why he was doing the stunt. Overacker responded that he was trying to raise awareness of the plight of the homeless, something he could have done in a million other, much safer ways. And he proceeded forward. When he reached the edge of the falls, he put his arms in the air and trusted that things would work out. Overacker's parachute never deployed, and he plunged 180 feet, 55 meters to his death. His body was pulled from the Niagara River by workers from the Maid of the Mist tourist boat, and the jet ski was initially wedged between some rocks, but it was washed away by the current. Judy Calabretta, who was visiting from Ohio and watched the Botched performance with her kids, told the Buffalo News that the jet ski went straight out and he went straight down. Police questioned the overacker's brother and a friend, who said that they had managed to talk him out of attempting the stunt twice before. But he was clearly determined to follow through, even if the general consensus seemed to think that the idea was crazy to the point of being stupid. 7. Crossing the Atlantic alone. After successfully drifting across the Atlantic alone in a specially built barrel-shaped vessel, 75-year-old French explorer Jean-Jacques Savin attempted to row across it in a custom-designed boat for one. He set out from Portugal on January 1st, 2022, for what he called his last challenge at sea, hoping to reach the Caribbean in 100 days and become the oldest person to ever complete a transatlantic rowing voyage. Something went wrong just 3 weeks later, when Savant wrote in a Facebook post that his desalination device for removing salt from ocean water wasn't working, forcing him to do it manually. It was costing him a lot of energy, but he reassured his followers that he wasn't in danger. Not long after that, Savant set off 2 distress beacons overnight and stopped updating his social media. The next day, the Portuguese Coast Guard found his boat overturned near the Azores, and his body was also retrieved. In all fairness, Savant was an extremely experienced sailor. He had crossed the Atlantic in a sailboat multiple times, and he wasn't the only person crazy enough to try rowing across it. But his unfortunate death proves that no matter how skilled someone is, there are times when no human being can survive the forces of the sea, especially alone in a tiny boat. 6. Botched bungee jumping attempt. It's hard to imagine what 22-year-old fast food worker Eric Barcia was thinking in 1997 when he decided to fashion his own bungee jumping mechanism despite having absolutely no professional experience doing so. He taped multiple bungee cords together to make one long cord, tied one end around his foot, tied the other end to a 70-foot, 21 meters railroad trestle in Fairfax County, Virginia, and jumped. Barcia slammed into the pavement and died. A pedestrian found his body around 2 o'clock in the morning and went for help. His car was found nearby, and there were no signs of anyone being with him when he took the fatal plunge. According to police spokesman Warren Carmichael, in a statement, Carmichael said that the makeshift bungee cord was longer than the distance from the trestle to the ground, which you've probably already figured out by now. Barcia's grandmother, Lucille Kalinsky, told the Washington Post that she had always known her grandson to be smart when it came to both school and work. He got good grades and was a responsible employee, so she was taken aback by the apparent lack of common sense involved in the decision that ended his life. Locals who didn't know Barcia were shocked that anyone would try bungee jumping with the type of cords he used, which are often used to hold car trunks closed or to secure things in place. They're not built to hold the weight of a human as they plummet toward the ground from a high landing. Not to mention, pedestrians were banned from going on the railroad bridge that Garcia jumped from due to the constant risk of being hit by a train. When asked for his thoughts about the tragedy by a Washington Post reporter, park visitor Steve Polemis looked up at the bridge and said, "It's hard to imagine a scenario that would not go wrong." 5. Deadly pee holding contest. In 2007, the Sacramento-based radio station KDND 107.9 hosted the Hold Your Wee for a Wee contest, which challenged participants to drink a large amount of water without using the bathroom. 28-year-old mother of 3, Jennifer Strange, entered the competition in hopes of winning the Nintendo Wii that the station was offering to the first-place contestant. She drank 1.5 gallons of water during the contest, then returned to her job. A little while later, Jennifer told her co-workers she had a headache and was going home. She was in so much pain, she was in tears. The young woman was found dead at her apartment later that day. Drinking too much water can cause a condition called hyponatremia, or acute water intoxication. It can be deadly, which is exactly what happened in Jennifer's case. And apparently the folks over at KDND didn't know this, or they probably would have found something less potentially fatal for its contestants to compete over. 10 radio station employees were fired after Jennifer's death, and a jury ruled that the company was liable for the tragedy. Her family received a $16.5 million payout. 4. Roof jumping. A surprising number of people have made news headlines for their unwise decision to jump from the roof of one building to another, and the catastrophic results that followed. Sadly, the consequences are often fatal, and many of the people who die are young teenagers who lack the sense of danger that most adults are equipped with. But, as you're about to learn, some grown-ups apparently never outgrew their juvenile sense of invincibility. In 2019, a 20-year-old college student named Jedediah Brookbank was found dead on the roof of a building in downtown Waxahachie, Texas. Police concluded that he was most likely roof jumping for fun on a Friday night when he came in contact with a live high-voltage wire and was fatally electrocuted. His father, Brian Brookbank, wrote in a Facebook post that it was a great way to go for a young man, albeit a little foolish. Later that year, 20-year-old Clemson University student Thomas Hurd Few was found dead next to a home in South Carolina. According to investigators, he was drinking and tried to jump from a railing onto a garage roof. He lost his footing at the edge of the roof and fell backwards onto the concrete below. In yet another incident of deadly roof jumping that took place in early 2020, a 23-year-old medical student from Drexel University named Vivek Subramani attempted to hop from one rooftop to another in North Philadelphia during the early morning hours. He was accompanied by 2 other students, one of whom later told police that he had been drinking at an event earlier that night. Subramani didn't quite clear the gap between the buildings like he had hoped, and he fell 2 stories. His friends administered CPR until paramedics arrived, but he died from his injuries. Police ruled out foul play after determining that the incident bore the hallmarks of a tragedy resulting from a reckless and impulsive decision. 3. Sledding straight into death. During a skiing trip in the Italian Alps in 2008, 46-year-old David Monk and his friends removed the padding from some crash barriers at the bottom of a ski lift and rode the rubber mats down the slope. By the time they realized how fast they were picking up speed, there was little they could do to stop themselves from crashing into the barrier that they had removed the padding from. Monk died from severe injuries to his head and chest, and 2 of his friends were also seriously hurt. Alan McGregor, who survived the accident, told the press that he and Monk's other friends tried to help him, but there was nothing they could do. Paramedics also tried to revive Monk, but he was too injured to pull through. Superintendent Mauro Soraglia said that the men had been out drinking before the tragedy, which isn't surprising given the area's reputation for partying among British tourists. The resort was closed when they went down the hill. Had it been open, it's probably safe to assume that a staff member would have stopped the men from removing the mats from the barrier. Monk's death was ruled a tragic accident, one that nobody in his life saw coming. 2. Reckless cliff diving. A Dutch family's vacation quickly turned to a tragedy when a former European soccer star decided to attempt a 100-foot, 30.5 meters jump off a cliff in Spain's Malgrat Islands. 31-year-old Morad Lamrabat had his wife and son film the incident as they watched from a boat down below, and the experience was nothing short of horrifying. In the video, Lamrabat can be heard yelling on the way down before his body smacked against some rocks that he was unable to clear. When his wife realized what had happened, she screamed out, "Oh my God." Sadly, the stunt gone wrong killed Lamrabat. His body was found later that day during a search. When news of the incident broke, police still hadn't questioned Lamrabat's wife because she was still in a state of shock. An autopsy found that the former footballer did not die from the impact of hitting the rocks, but that he drowned in a semi-conscious state. Cliff diving is reportedly popular among tourists in the Balearic Islands, so Lamrabat certainly wasn't the only person who visits there and is willing to take such a dangerous leap. At the same time, his death was completely avoidable, and hopefully caused at least some people to think twice about whether a daredevil achievement is worth risking their life. 1. Hand grenade selfie. In 2015, the Russian Interior Ministry published a selfie safety guide amid a disturbing rise in selfie-related deaths and serious injuries. Earlier that year, 2 men died while posing for a selfie with a hand grenade that had the pin pulled out. The fateful moment was immortalized in a photo captured on one of their cell phones. Unfortunately, the government safety brochure apparently didn't reach the hands of Alexander Sasha Cheshik, who took a photo of himself holding a grenade in the city of Labinsk in 2017. He sent the image to a friend who immediately expressed concern for Sasha's safety and warned him not to mess around. The friend sent another text asking Sasha where he was, but never received a response. By then, the grenade had exploded, and the young man had been killed instantly. A source told Russia's Interfax news service that the blast tore Sasha in half. Authorities believed that he mistakenly thought the grenade wouldn't explode as long as he didn't throw it. They ruled his death an accident. Thanks for watching. Would you rather lose your dominant hand because you weren't paying attention while operating a dangerous piece of machinery, or be caught on camera talking so much crap that you permanently destroy your reputation and are outcasted from your community? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.